Farid for his beautiful ice-breaking game talking about our mothers, our favorite quality of our mothers, as well as favorite animals and things like that. So can we have a round of applause for Alright, so before we officially start the conference today, we would like to, and again, my name is Cayenne, like the pepper, and I am your MC for today. So before we officially start the conference today, we would like to acknowledge the participation of the ASEAN countries and East Timor. So delegates, please rise when I announce the country you are representing. Alright, so can we first have delegates from Brunei? Could you guys please stand up? And these are our delegates from Brunei, and you may have a seat. So next up we have delegates from Cambodia. Cambodia? Oh wow. That's a big friendly bunch. Alright, thank you. Can we have delegates from Indonesia? Indonesia. Got it. Alright, thank you. Can we have delegates from Laos? Okay, thank you. Can we have delegates from Malaysia? Malaysia. Alright, hello. From Myanmar? Alright, very supportive. Mingalada. Alright, can we have delegates from the Philippines? There's two outside? Okay. Alright, I'll say the same thing, Manikham. Alright, can we also have delegates from Singapore?
Outside.
Is it outside also? Okay. Alright, thank you. Can we have delegates from Thailand?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll do it again, maybe. If we have time, maybe. Alright, can we have delegates from Vietnam? Vietnam. Right? It's in shower. Alright, and last but not least, can we have delegates from East Timor? Alright, and thank you. Alright, so we would also like to acknowledge the people from the Regional Steering Committee. So could you guys please rise? Regional Steering Committee, or the RSC. Alright, thank you. And also, our local organizing committee. They're all outside. Alright, we'll send our acknowledgement towards them. Alright, so to everyone here and to everyone else, thank you for spending this wonderful morning with us. So it will be a great 3 days. So let us start the events proper. And again, thank you for
the Indochina zone, the Central zone, and the Southern Archipelagic zone, okay, which includes Philippines and Papua New Guinea. I raise this because why that is so, and is that really inevitable, and is that really no solution? This is what we need to think about. So in thinking about the future of Singapore in ASEAN, some of us have postulated within the ERIA concept a rectangle that connects Malacca, Singapore, in which I will be elaborating on. And that is that in the fourth industrial revolution, given the possibility of e-commerce, which means that a small producer can have the world as a market. And there is discussion going on right now. Jack Ma wants to set up an e-commerce school in Indonesia. This is under discussion. Buriram province, where the poorest children, the experiment was, is it possible that the poorest children of Thailand can become the smartest children of Thailand? This is the children. And that mega city else can be decentralized. Centralization is a trap that is foisted upon people by corporate global neoliberal capitalism. And the labor movement is simply an adjunct to that. What is the possibility of decentralized urbanization? With 4 billion people, it is possible to occupy only 0.7% of the total arable land on planet Earth. In other words, the present models of urbanization is obsolete. I will now read the paper which I prepared for this conference. It's my brainchild, born in 2007. It is a composite word I had to invent to conceptually integrate the rural and the urban as one space and not as two spaces. Big city urbanism and climate change both call for a rethink of the current model of development, more so given trade war and bridge and road initiative. Michai Viravaidah's Cabbages and Condoms restaurants, who I work with, and his Pattaya resort generate financial resources which he funneled to the rural schools and village improvements. The effects are dramatic. I was involved with Michai 12 years ago in building the school in Lamplamat province, and it started with the poor children. Today, the students, many of them are now in universities. The school does not have an exam system. Students do not take exams.
Going against discrimination, all forms of discrimination. So I hope towards the end of my little sharing, you will get to see the point. Now, for those who may not be aware, I'm sure my Indonesian friends know, konfrontasi referred specifically in Singapore to a period where Indonesia and Malaysia, Singapore went through a difficult time between 1963 and 1966 because of the proposal to form Malaysia, eventual formation of Malaysia, and even up to after the separation of Singapore from Malaysia. And it only stopped when the then Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was advised upon his visit to Indonesia to lay a wreath at the memorial of the 2 fallen Indonesian soldiers. They were executed for bombing, well, a place in Singapore then. But guess what happened? Many years down the line, Indonesia is now the 4th largest trading partner of Singapore. Of course, I got this figure from the internet, assuming it's reliable. But from indirect sources, we know that Indonesia does have a very, very strong economic relationship, at least with Singapore. Then you use law. So again, earlier someone mentioned rule by law. Yes, we must live by the rule of law. But the trouble is when the laws that are made are so ridiculous. We have one recent one where even one person on the street is considered a possession. And if you do something like holding up a mirror, you are considered as demonstrating. And that person went to jail because he refused to pay the fine. So that's Singapore, yes. Sad to say, yeah. So we don't have a very proud record in human rights. But we have to go beyond all this. And that's why I dialogue. When you act on yourself from a forum like this, you are not promoting the idea of having dialogue. When you come and sit here, right now you're sitting down, monologue, sorry, but later on, right, throughout the sessions the next few days, hopefully there'll be a lot of yeah. So we don't have a very proud record in human rights. But we have to go beyond all this. And that's why I'm sitting up here trying to share this idea. How can we resolve conflicts? So first was a dialogue. When you act on yourself from a forum like this, you're not promoting the idea of having dialogue. when you come and sit here, right now you're sitting down, monologue, sorry, but later on, right, throughout the sessions the next few days, hopefully there'll be a lot of dialogues. One-to-one, a few-to-one, group-to-group, whatever. Create this dialogue.
I prepared some PowerPoint, but more graphic, there is no point, just photo, First, I'm extremely happy to be here because this is my 30th anniversary of my first visit to Singapore.
Welcome.
30th anniversary. So my first visit to Singapore was 1988. Different function A group, they were that time for formation as an exec director between the people in Southeast Asia and Northeast Asia for peace and human security. Because this is very important, because these two powers trying to bring us to their own side. So, what is our alternative? How can we create more alternative regime for peace and human rights, and also SDG in this East Asia? That's why I want to appeal to in Vietnam and Laos, Cambodia, during the Vietnam War, a lot of bombs, unexploited. So you can, people in Laos, they cannot cultivate the rural area, no rural development without, because of this one, so like a landmine, So very cleverly, they put this one as a part of US SDG agenda, but number 18, So there are some suggestions. SDG 17, goal 17 was not perfect, not enough, some countries, so each country add additionally goal 18, Goal 18, especially the security issues, these type of issues, to make it more relevant to your country. So, in conclusion, SDG can be very useful if you understand and also learn how to use SDG as a tool, especially using goal 10, inequality, and goal 16, gender, peace, human rights, democracy, and also additionally goal 18, if you want. So lastly, this is my conclusion.
Well, do we discriminate against a woman? Same job, same treatment, right? Same pay, but it doesn't happen. Singapore has a practice less than, women don't get 60% of the man's salary. Not all of them. Most of them get around less. So my point is that the next one is about age of children. Yes, most ASEAN countries would agree on the worst form of exploitation of children. Of course, even Brunei signed. But all the other conventions, Brunei did not sign. Myanmar has signed 3. I will not go into the detail. It's going to take long. So the point I'm trying to say is these basic labor standards are not there for their own nationals. It doesn't also, it means not for the migrants. Keep that in mind. This core labor standard is for everyone. In ASEAN, if you want to improve to decent living, working standards, ASEAN want to reduce the poverty gap, you have to deal with these first. If all the talk about economic development doesn't lead to, even though they declare they
know AICHR. If you know AICHR, can you please raise your hand? Okay, so AICHR is more popular than APF. So take that as a milestone. So AICHR, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, was created in 2009. And TOR was adopted on the 42nd AMM. And it's mandated with the promotions and protections of human rights in ASEAN. And it's comprised of representatives selected by each member state's president or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, either through direct appointment or in some cases open elections. And from November 2017 until 2018, some of the key engagement between AICHR and CSOs are the increased number of application from CSOs to obtain the consultative relationship with AICHR. So just for your information, in 2015, AICHR have a consensus to receive the guideline of
Already made an arrangement, some engagements in the coming hours. So let's make the most out of this 30 minutes with our members of the European Parliament. But nonetheless, we still new in these years ACSC, and you may not be familiar about the town hall meeting, but those who have been attending the town hall meeting, they started in 2015 in Malaysia as an initiative by the parliamentarians under the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, but since it got a good response from the audience and also from the parliamentarians, this continued until 2016, and then it also broadened the collaboration, so from parliamentarians reaching out to the civil society, but also now joining forces together, the civil society and the parliamentarians, holding this town hall meeting to address urgent concerns in the region, and this town hall meeting provides that kind of space for discussion and dialogue. And this kind of space also eventually leads to collaboration, networking, and hopefully better understanding and working together in pursuing the demands of the people, and particularly on the issue of human rights and democracy. Of course, Sami Duray already mentioned that with regard to human rights, it's not just the civil and political, but we should also always remember that there is the social and economic aspects. And this also consists, or primarily the concerns in the social dimension in this ASEAN. So from the meeting also in the Philippines, and the title was Shrinking Civic Space. And while we recognize that it's still an issue, but we need to move forward from stating our problem, our concerns, but moving from there to what are we doing now to reclaim the civic space. And also last year there was a good outcome from the discussions, and well, there was a common understanding that we need also to move forward in asserting the missing link, in raising the missing link in the ASEAN integration, which is social dimension. And that's why we also, and we have Luis Nang from the People's Action Party from Singapore, and we have Congressman Tom Villarin from the House of Representatives in the Philippines, and we have Lena Lena Mariana Mukti from the United Development Party in Indonesia, and of course we have from the European Parliament Enrique Guerrero, the president of the global president or chair of the Global Progressive Forum, and also a member of the Development Committee in the European Parliament, and he's from Spain. And we have Nina Gill from UK, and she's also a member of the Global Progressive Forum and part of the EU-ASEAN delegation. And then lastly, and last but not the least, we have Ms. Liliana Rodriguez, also a member of the European Parliament and part of the Global Progressive Forum, and she's with the Committee on Human Rights. Maybe some of you are wondering why we have the Global Progressive Forum here, and why Europe, society, and progressive politicians from all around the world. So we see the trend now, it's connecting. Civil society reaching out to parliamentarians, but likewise, parliamentarians reaching out to civil society. So now the question is, after hearing the reports from Sami Duray and Rachel, we are wondering what our parliamentarians see, what resonates with the work of the parliamentarians, and how we see the situation with regard to human rights particularly, and what has been done or what is being done in the parliament, and what do you see can be done more to address these issues that are being raised. We start first on the issue of human rights, and can I call on Congressman Tom?
A new organization, a regional organization of independent parliamentarians. We come from at least 7 countries in ASEAN. This is not a government-sanctioned organization. unlike IPA and you have the ICHER. We are members of APHR are individual parliamentarians who come from the broad spectrum. We have from the administration political parties, and we have from the opposition political parties. This is not a party-based association, but more of individuals, parliamentarians who want to assert that human rights is a primary duty, not just of citizens, but especially of parliamentarians who were elected in office. Upholding human rights, defending democracy, fighting inequality, I think sums up what APHR stands for. In terms of its advocacy, APHR, well, our mechanisms as a collegial bodies are involving in like undertaking fact-finding missions. No? We also do international advocacy work, and we also engage the public through the media with regards to our stand on specific issues. So these issues on human rights especially would be from the issue what's happening in Rohingya, issues what's happening in Cambodia, in the Philippines, in Thailand, where the erosion of democracy has really been so blatant. No? Of course, in APHR's advocacies, we have met some difficulties, but in a way, for us, upholding human rights has been a major, not just a drive for parliamentarians, but it has also given us hope in the region. And recently, what Malaysia did during the last elections was a signal. There's a bright spot in the region.
In a town hall meeting last year also in Philippines. I think that because we have time constraints, the best way is to explain you how we act in the European Parliament, trying to protect human rights inside of Europe and also outside of Europe. How we can contribute from the European Parliament for the respect of the human rights in different regions of the world. Of course, we have a legal framework in the European Union. We have a Charter of Fundamental Rights. We have ways to protect the respect of this Charter. Every citizen or organization can appeal to the European Court of Justice that refers to the 28, for the moment, member states of the European Union, but also to the European Court of Human Rights, which is even affecting more European countries, not only countries member of the European Union. The decisions of both courts are executive for the member states in order to implement the decision of the court.
Inside it's transversal to countries who doesn't respect human rights will be penalized through the European funds. So no money, that's what it means. I will keep the dimension of gender equality in human rights because it's one of the concerns of the European Parliament. Of course, we are very worried about bringing civil society and ONGs to human rights questions, but also in the Human Rights Committee we treat things like child rights and gender rights. Of course, this is Europe is not perfect. We have big problems also in Europe. I can give you 3 or 4 countries who have that problems. For example, Hungary, Poland, sorry. But I don't agree with something that you have said in your study. You say that the laws of defamation can be dangerous. It depends. For example, I am from one of the most progressive countries in Europe. I'm from Portugal. But we also have the law of defamation. It depends the way you use the law. Because politicians also should be protected. It depends what the use you give to it. Of course, cases like Turkey can be very problematic, and other countries. One of the focus that we put in gender rights as human rights is the role of education, and in that part I totally agree with you. So I was the reporter for a report called Empowering Girls Through Education, and the Parliament approved that all member states should begin with gender issues at school since they are very little in preschool. It was approved like that. Of course, it's a recommendation. For example, in some countries like Spain, like mine, we have it before primary school. We abolished things like the blue classes and the pink classes. We don't have it anymore in our countries. It's small things, but they make all the difference. Of course, the question of gender equality, it's a long process. Even in some countries in Europe, they have different ways of developing the gender issues because of the cultural and social norms. You can ask me, but should we change it? How we will do it? Through education, it's the only possibility. That's why in Europe we have the convention, Istanbul Convention, that protects women against violence. We now finished last week in the European Parliament the report about human rights in the world. Asia is getting worse, but it's not only Asia, it's in all the world. In our case, we adopt the model human rights and gender equality because we really believe that women should be a priority of all the governments in European Union. I have here some notes. For example, our fight against human rights violations. For example, in context of war, the use of women's body as a war weapon, and genocide. So we decide for 4 things. First, the need of prioritized prevention of atrocities, for example, training militaries, training policy. Support for investigations and prosecution in case of genocides, crimes against humanity and war crimes. Third, fight against impunity of non-state actors. And 4, the gender dimension in approaching human rights violations in conflict situations. So, of course, it's a long report that we are negotiating. Something like 3 months. We are negotiating the final version. But I like to remind that 50% of the population in the world are more or less are women, and it should be good that the government reminds that.
Rights was mentioned as something, a very important document that citizens can also invoke in issues arising on human rights. Now we go back to ASEAN. Can we hear from Ivo?
In terms of where ASEAN is going. And I think, when we were working hard in the EU to make sure there was economic growth, one of the things we expected as an outcome was that greater economic growth would lead to solidifying of civil society, of democracy, and better human rights. But as we've already heard, unfortunately, that has not happened hand in hand. And so, one of the reasons is because, Sami pointed out in his presentation, because actually ASEAN hasn't got the legally binding documentation. And the thing that really holds ASEAN back is the fact that, they have this concept of non-interference in each other's countries' affairs. And the sending states, in terms of migrant workers, really are not getting their act together, as if I say. They're not strong enough. They have to push, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand to address these issues, because they are the receiving state. So I think, you know, Sami, you already pointed out that, you know, it's really crucial that you have legally binding documents, because that's what really makes the difference, and we have that within the EU. But I think even more, I think it's equally important that, you know, the small steps ASEAN has made when it comes to, you know, actually the declaration that was agreed, that you referred to in 2007, that was reviewed in 2017, and it has one little glimmer of hope, that it says the Labour ministers are tasked to come in with the action plan. So I think that gives all of you an opportunity to try and address, to really put the pressure on, to say what we want is legally binding, you know, outcome out of this. And it gives the parliamentarian that base, that, you know, to lobby their Labour ministers that they address this issue. I think, you know, Sami, you also referred to that the focus is the economy, but what one of the things civil society can do is make the connections, and sometimes, you know, politicians and policymakers forget the reason ASEAN's economy has been so successful is because of the effectiveness of migrant labour. And had you not had that migrant labour, you wouldn't have had the kind of economic success, you know, you've had. And really, you know, looking at Europe, saying, if we don't learn the lessons from Europe, you know, we don't get it all right. We make lots of mistakes. And one of the mistakes for a very long time we had in UK is that we didn't apply something called Posted Workers Directive, right? And that was to ensure that migrants actually got the same sort of, I mean, although they get the same rights, but the same kind of salaries. Now, why am I referring to this particular directive? Because this played a big part in the so-called Brexit referendum, right? And I'm sure most of you have heard about this. But basically, you know, when the times are good and when you've got full employment, you know, nobody cares, you know, there aren't any issues with the, let's say, the employees and the population of any country. But when the situation changes, and you know, it changed in the UK because, you know, we had kind of deindustrialization and then automation and digitalization meant that there were huge numbers of people who could not any longer fill the skills that were necessary. So we had a lot of people within Europe moving to the UK. But that created a real resentment against those coming in, but they were doing the same jobs at a cheaper salary. So I think it's really critical.
One of the powerful aspects of the ASEAN Civil Society Conference and ASEAN People's Forum, beyond the overall framework that discusses the major objectives for the people-centered approach in the region, is actually the ASEAN parliamentarian session known as the Town Hall meeting. At this Town Hall meeting that took place this year, elected officials from Singapore, the Philippines, as well as Indonesia spoke about what the parliaments were considering, also with representatives from parliamentarians in Europe. So we had members of parliament that were also from the United Kingdom, Portugal, and also Spain, sharing their perspectives of how, at the regional level, the European Parliament could be of assistance, but also how the members of Parliament around the world should represent their people better. At this event, it was promoting the social dimension and reclaiming civil society space. This was quite as valuable, and what was also pointed out was how the European Parliament has specific committees and subcommittees that people of ASEAN could utilize when human rights violations take place, but also how we can partner together for the 2030 development agenda. And many of the members of parliament from the Europe side were able to share what possible partnerships exist and how we can achieve the 17 global goals. So that was quite important, and that really did round out the first day. So on the first day, the format of the ASEAN Civil Society Conference is mainly, you have the big thoughts, you have the thinkers sharing what are the most compelling challenges and how can we create compassionate campaigns that are creative and, more importantly, people-centered, that bring everyone together. But then the town hall meetings have also come about and have kept getting larger with actually finding good parliamentarians. And in that case, the ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights is a good partner for members to work with whenever they're looking at issues. And that really did round out the first day. Another important part of all of this, though, is just networking, because people come together who care about women's rights, who care about the issue of what's going on with armed conflict in the region, who care about regional mechanisms to promote and protect human rights, who care about environmental destruction, who care about defending environmental and human rights defenders who are being killed at an alarming rate, to work to make sure that we have freedom of press, to make sure we focus on the climate change issues, to make sure that indigenous rights are at the forefront. And all these groups come together during these 3-day sessions to discuss. What's quite exciting, and we'll get into later, is how Thailand will be hosting next year's. And the exciting thing is they're looking at extending the format from beyond 3 days to a full week. And in that full week, we'll look at commemorating the 10th anniversary of the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights and focus on what we could really do to make that stronger, as well as also focusing beyond ASEAN to connect with the Pacific region and come up with an Asia-Pacific perspective on the important issues in international law. So this is quite exciting, and these are some of the things that we're looking at. Thank you very much for tuning in, and I look forward to sharing with you about day 2 and day 3 and what happens there. Thank you.
สบายดีบรรดาท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านในนอกประเทศที่เคารพนับถือวันนี้พวกข้าพเจ้าคณะองค์การพันธมิตรเพื่อประชาธิปไตยในลาวได้เดินทางเข้ามาร่วมของวันชนของกลุ่มอาเซียนวันที่2 เดือนพฤศจิกายนครั้งแรกที่ประเทศสิงคโปร์กองประชุมวันนี้ข้าพเจ้าก็ได้มีการเปิดกองประชุมโดยที่ว่ามีบรรดาผู้ตั้งหน้าการจัดตั้งต่างๆของภาคประชาชนจากกลุ่มอาเซียนและการยังมีบรรดาต่างหน้าการจัดตั้งต่างๆของการจัดตั้งสากลและนั้นก็ยังมีบรรดาผู้แทนสภานักการเมืองจากสหภาพยุโรปและประเทศอื่นเช่นว่าจากเกาหลีใต้จากไต้หวันก็ได้มาร่วมภาคเศร้าของประชุมหลังจากมีการเปิดพิธีหรือว่ากล่าวบันทึกเหตุของหลายท่านไปแล้วภาคบ่ายในการอันสำคัญที่สุดเป็นของผู้ได้เชิญผู้รับผิดชอบของสภายุโรปประเทศสภาของยุโรปของหลายประเทศ3 ท่านแล้วก็แทนสภาของประเทศสิงคโปร์ของประเทศฟิลิปปินส์และก็ของประเทศมาเลเซียทุกคนก็ได้มีการโต้วาทีทุกเถียงปัญหาตั้งคำถามใส่ว่าบรรดาประเทศในกลุ่มอาเซียนมีการปกปักรักษาสิทธิมนุษย์แบบใดแก้ไขปัญหาสิทธิมนุษย์ใดแบบใดปัญหาค้าอยู่ใดและอยู่ในประเทศอยู่ในสหภาพยุโรปเขาจะแก้ไขปัญหาแบบใดและเป็นแบบอย่างเดี๋ยวใดที่จะควรแก้ไขอยู่ในกลุ่มอาเซียนเป็นภาคสำคัญของประชุมดังกล่าวสำหรับพวกเราคณะของการพันธมิตรเพื่อประชาธิปไตยในลาววันนี้กระเทียมภาคดำเนินจะได้มีการเข้าร่วมรายการไซต์อินเวนต์ซึ่งพวกเราจะได้กล่าวเกี่ยวกับปัญหาการละเมิดสิทธิของประชาชนอยู่ในกลุ่มอาเซียนซึ่งว่าพวกเราจะได้กล่าวปัญหากองประชุมนี้จะดำเนินไปถึงวันที่4 เดือนพฤศจิกายนท่านได้เป็นคำสั่งการคำที่คำเห็นอะไรครับ
สำหรับข้าพเจ้าและก็เป็นดีใจหลายและก็ภูมิใจหลายที่ได้มาประกอบส่วนและเข้าร่วมของภาพเอเชียนที่ประเทศสิงคโปร์ในรายละเอียดที่ทางประธานเป็นคนอธิบายไปแล้วสำหรับเมื่อนี้ก็จะมีภาพส่วนพวกเขาอาจจะได้เข้าพวกเขาที่มาเข้าพันธมิตรเพื่อประชาธิปไตยในเราจะได้เข้าร่วมเป็นไซต์วันยูนิคคือกันแล้วก็เชิญฮับฟังฮับชมต่อไปเมื่อผลออกมาจะเป็นยังไงช่วยเหลือเหตุการณ์เฉพาะมือขอบใจ